Let's paint a sweet little landscape. It will take far less than 10 minutes, and I'm only going to use this cat tongue brush and a small size 2 brush for detail only when drawing the tree. Now, I'm using really inexpensive paper here. I did a reel recently showing that I was painting on paper from the dollar store, and I just used it because I wanted to experiment. I wanted to try different techniques, and I didn't want to use expensive paper. And I realized that I was getting some pretty decent results. So let me show you here exactly how I did it. Now, the important part is because the paper does not hold water all that well. In fact, it is thirsty, but you can't oversaturate it because you'll make a mess of the paper. So the best thing to do is have all the paints prepped. The sky color was important, but I also wanted to have the shadows for those clouds. So I mixed neutral color. I mixed some of it that resembled tea, and the other one had a thicker consistency like coffee. And that was just used to put a little bit of dimension into those clouds. And then underneath that, I started putting in a bit of green. Now, the important part here was to use a lot of really transparent colors. So all my watercolors here are either really watered down or they are in fact very transparent inherently. So I used a very light one in the background and put a slightly darker one into the foreground. Now, of course, the choice of greens here is up to you, but I just like to keep these colors pretty natural. I don't like using too vibrant of a green. And again, here I'm using just two different planes. I wanted to give it almost like a bit of a hill. I'll use a slightly darker color in the foreground because I want that background to be very bright, almost sunlit. And then I will put some trees just to indicate some activity in the very, very back. And they don't all have to be in the same plane. You don't have to draw them along the same line. In fact, some could look a lot closer than others. Now, here's a little trick I like to do is once those are in, I like to go in with a really clean brush. So I wet the brush, completely clean it, dry it out again, and then put a really clean line under that whole thing. It really crisps it up, and it gives it almost like a sunlit area right in front of the trees. Now we'll also use that same clean brush to push some of those greens upward. So I think you can see it here in a moment where I am basically just drawing some trees. You can see I'm adding a slightly different color, and then I'll go back in and I will take a clean brush and just sweep it upward. Just the very, here we go, just like that, because that will almost indicate tree trunks and also give a little bit of height to those little trees in the background. It is such a fine little detail, but it does make a difference to a final painting. Now, I'm just putting some grasses onto these little hills in front. The largest ones will be in the center, closest to me, and then as I'm moving away from the center, I'm making them smaller. And I am going to add a tree to this one. Now, the previous painting I showed you had a different type of tree. I treated it very differently. I used a very small brush for the other one for all the leaves. So basically, I painted almost every leaf with a tiny brush, giving it far more detail. But here I'm going in with just a small brush, indicating the trunks of the tree and the bulk of it. But the rest of it, I will go back to that cat tongue brush just to start adding some foliage. Now, that really light, warm green, this is an olive green, will be added to the left of the tree because that's where I want the sun to come in from. And then the rest of the tree will have bluer, darker color green as well. And then I will also bulk up the trunk of the tree and some of those branches, again, paying attention to the light source. So the right side of the trunks will be darker, and the same thing with the actual branches. So you can paint the tree however you like. There's so many different ways. And the nice part when you're painting on inexpensive paper like this and you're just experimenting is realizing that there is no wrong way. You can painted with a large brush, go back and put some details, or start with a tiny brush if you feel better that way. And the results will be very, very different. But like I said, neither one of them is wrong. You just have to pick what you enjoy doing at that moment. So I'm just going to bulk up the shadows and add a few more leaves. And it's up to you how much detail you want to add, because this is one of those things that you can just keep going. And there is a point, though, at which we can overdo it. Now, what I do like putting in always is a shadow from that tree. So if the light's coming from the left, the shadow will be casted onto the right side of the tree. So that area will become slightly darker. All I'm doing is adding a bit of blue to those greens. And that's how I'm creating the shadow color. Now, this is when all the detail in the foreground comes in. I'm just going to add a little bit more depth to the tree, and I will add some grasses to the front. This is when you can really have fun and add flowers. You can add different colors, different types of grasses as well, just to bulk up the front and give it that interest. But as I said, here is the previous tree that I drew in very different technique, and here's the one that we just did now. So give this a try.